Planned Parenthood named her Employee of the Year in 2016. Welcome to Freedom Alive. Mayra Rodriguez started working at Planned Parenthood because she believed she would be helping women. But Mayra eventually became a whistleblower to reveal what she witnessed behind the scenes and why she was fired from the largest abortion giant. Mayra joins us today to share her incredible story. I'm blessed to again be joined by my friend and co-host, Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel. Matt, it's horrific that even with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, we've allowed a culture of abortion in America. And people often use euphemisms instead of addressing the truth about murdering children and harming women.
You know, I was recently talking to somebody about abortion who's running for office and talking about what their position is. I think that there's no better way, unfortunately, to actually see what abortion is than to actually see the results of an abortion. That's what hit me back in 1983 when I watched a documentary called Assignment Life, and there was on that documentary a filming of a first trimester suction tube abortion. This was, a horrible thing to watch. I wouldn't want people necessarily to watch it, but I'm telling you, when you see that, all the euphemisms go away. Reproductive health, freedom, all that, bodily autonomy, it's my body, all that goes away. It just literally vanishes when you see what happens in an abortion, even in the very, very early stages.
Exactly. Unbelievable. This is an amazing story with Mayra. We cannot wait to bring it to you. Up next is Liberty Counsel's Freedom Alert.
Student religious groups must have equal access. Liberty Counsel represents Good News Clubs and other student religious groups that must have equal access in public schools. So Liberty Counsel joined other student-focused ministries to send a letter to the U.S. Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, urging the federal department to revise current guidance to ensure this equal treatment. Last February, the Department of Education updated its guidance on constitutionally protected prayer and religious expression in public elementary and secondary schools. This includes allowing all groups access to bulletin boards or the public address system. But the updated guidance did not include some of the language that helps stop unfair and unequal treatment of student religious groups. School administrators often fail to understand that federal law requires them to allow the religious expression of religious groups.
Up next, Matt's interview with Mayra Rodriguez.
I want to welcome a very special guest to Freedom Alive, Mayra Rodriguez. She was a 2016 Planned Parenthood Employee of the Year and then became a Planned Parenthood whistleblower. We want to talk about how that happened, came about, and what she learned in that role. Welcome to Freedom Alive, Mayra.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, thank you for joining us. Mayra, for those that may not be familiar with your background, I mentioned you were a 2016 Planned Parenthood Employee of the Year, but then you became a whistleblower. You were 17-year director of 3 Planned Parenthood facilities, but then you also sued Planned Parenthood as well. So let's begin with the beginning. How is it that you got associated with Planned Parenthood and why?
Well, I have to start by telling you that I am born Mexican and I came to this beautiful country, like many other immigrants, trying to make a better life, safer life. And my friend worked for this organization that helps women, and they needed people who speak Spanish. I like to emphasize on that because it is important to the story and who Planned Parenthood is. They hired me because they wanted me to go and kind of wake up the Latino community and liberate women, right? And promote their ideology in my community. At first, I thought that was a positive thing. I was helping my own women. I was helping women, and I was promoting services to women. And that's how I entered the doors of Planned Parenthood. Now, being opposed to abortion myself for myself, right? Like as a Catholic, born and raised Catholic, I would have never chosen abortion for myself. So obviously, when they gave me the kind of knowledge that, well, this is the way we prevent abortions, right? By promoting safe sex and birth control and all this. And then I just fed into the ideology of women have the right to choose.
So you started off and you were obviously pro-life for yourself, based on your Catholic beliefs. You wouldn't do an abortion yourself. But then you got involved because you wanted to prevent people from having an abortion, but then you changed over time, at least for other people, that they had a right to be able to have an abortion. So how did that process come about? Was it just through a gradual process as you're talking to people that are in the Planned Parenthood community?
Yeah, so they start grooming you. That's a word I like to use now, right? In the past, I used to say they start training you, right? Training you why abortion is needed in our society, why women need to have the right to choose, right? And obviously, it's not as pretty as it looks on their social media. Usually the training goes on, well, you know, these women are on drugs, you know, these women have not had prenatal care, these women are going through this. You don't want their babies to come to this world and suffer. You know, it starts shifting into this suffering of the world. Why would you want babies to come and suffer, right? And then obviously also helping women. Why will women need that burden in their lives when they're already having a hard life? Why will women want multiple children, right? So I became really good about selling abortion and the idea of abortion, even though the majority of my years at Planned Parenthood were in non-abortion facilities. They were in preventive side. I used to go to school and teach children how to use condoms. You know, when I say children, I'm talking 7th, 8th grade, talking to them about hiding birth control from their parents, talking to Latino women hiding birth control from their husbands, not telling their husbands about having abortions, right? In this kind of like grooming of women need their freedom, even if it's in their husband and marriage situation.
Well, obviously, you started off at a certain level, but you rose to the director of 3 different Planned Parenthood facilities. So obviously, you began to be groomed and began to present the Planned Parenthood narrative. What kinds of things, before we get to your awakening, your revelation, your change of thinking, before we get to that, I want to definitely focus on that. What kinds of things did you see along the process? What did you see? Obviously, some of the things you just said about going into these young kids and trying to give them these things for sex. That's one thing. But what other things did you see that was happening within Planned Parenthood that ultimately began to change your mind?
Well, you know, as a parent myself, I wouldn't want anyone to tell my child to hide something from me, right? But I was told you go in there because then if they feel they can trust you, then they know who they have to go when they're in a situation, you know, when they have an STD or when they're having intercourse and they need help. But if you go and present yourself as you need to talk to your parents, you know, you need to be abstinent, they're not going to trust you as their Planned Parenthood best friend, right? So basically my job was to go into the schools, you know, and present myself as this cool person that you can come talk to after school. And then once they came there, it was also having the information on how you can get an abortion without a parental consent. You know, that never settled with me because I thought the judicial bypass, right, which is what the minors in states that require parental consent can get from a judge. First of all, it was a specific judges in certain court offices, right? And then besides, it was telling them, training these teenage kids how to present themselves responsible, so then a judge will grant them a judicial bypass that basically says you're mature enough to have an abortion. When if they were mature enough, they would not have put themselves into that situation. That never settled with me. As a parent, I was like, but, you know, but then again, you're like, well, you know, it's one of those things, you know, you don't want a child having a child, right? And then comes the other excuse. And then with that, it was the not wanting to tell women, you know, when they had multiple abortions, hey, maybe you should stop having abortions and think about I don't know, hysterectomy or just a surgery to prevent you from getting pregnant again, right? Like a tubal ligation. It wasn't like when you talk to those providers and say, hey, why don't you advise her? Like she shouldn't have any more abortions. She shouldn't get pregnant again. No, that's not our job. We're not here to judge them. If that's what they want to do, that's what they want to do. So it wasn't I started noticing that it wasn't about caring for women. And that became clear when I became the director of an abortion facility. That was a very strong wake-up call for me to be in charge of the abortion facility. And I like to explain people, it's like when you're part of a gang. You know, as a Mexican, I can describe you the cartel kind of like levels, right? When they're just the street vendors to the sicarios, which are the killers, to the top bosses, right? Same thing here at Planned Parenthood. When you're in a certain level, you don't get to see certain things. You don't get to hear certain messages. You don't get to read certain documents that they become available to you when you're the director of an abortion facility.
When you're the director of the abortion facility, and you were with Planned Parenthood for 17 years, director of 3 Planned Parenthood facilities, did you ever witness an abortion?
I did actually. And I mean, for many years I was trained and I trained others to do ultrasounds, even though I had no credentials to do that. And I trained others with no credentials to do that. And I trained many to do ultrasounds for early detection of pregnancy and gestational sizing for the purpose of abortions. And I had seen abortion, right? And I have seen the procedure and I have described the procedure, I can tell you probably 1,000,000 times, but it wasn't until I understood what it meant when I was a director and I had to see it face to face daily, right? I always like to tell people now when I tell my story, it is not the same when you're just describing the abortion than when you're the one piling up the babies piece by piece, counting their legs, arms, and torsos in a Ziploc bag. It's not the same to describe the abortion when you're watching the women broken right after their abortion in a recovery chair, sipping on Sprite and crackers. It's not the same. Like, I welcome any pro-abortion person to face that daily and then tell me you're still pro-abortion.
Yeah, Mayra, I was just saying that as an introduction to this program for your interview. That's what hit me when I watched the film in 1983 called Assignment Life, and they had a first trimester suction tube abortion. And talking about this, you can talk about it all day long, you can describe it, but when you see it, it's so different. It's so different, and it's so moving. And I don't see how anybody could ever witness that and still say that abortion ought to be permissible. When you see the baby being dismembered and you have to reassemble the body parts to make sure everything is out so that nothing's left to cause infection, that's a horrible, horrible image that will never leave my mind. So how did you, Mayra, come to a position where you rejected what you were doing at Planned Parenthood and ended up becoming a whistleblower? And then what did you reveal that was happening in Planned Parenthood?
Well, the how is by the mercy of God, first of all, right? That he opened my eyes to the truth that I was so stubborn to see for many years. When I became the director, I started seeing things that were like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So a couple of the things that I call out from the beginning were the wrongdoings, constantly violating rules and regulations in place to protect women, not reporting any complications. They don't report the complication. That was shocking to me because as a director of other facilities that were non-abortion, that was my job. My job was to report the complications. And now here I am, the director of an abortion facility. So in my eyes, if I was doing that for non-abortions, that I should be doing this for abortion facilities. And no, it was the place of the abortionist to report his own complications. It's like, what? How? How is that even allowed and legal? Well, now we know that they don't even want them to report any complications. So, and I saw perforations happening, and I'm not telling you perforations happen like once a month. No, daily, a woman left that center perforated by an abortion. And most of the time, the abortionists didn't even know he perforated that woman. It wasn't until she was at the emergency room or she called back weeks after bleeding that they realized she had been perforated during the abortion. And I saw them, override a lot of the rules that keep women safe. For example, if they had high blood pressure, if they had low iron, and they were anemic or on the border of anemia, they will constantly falsify those records. I witnessed falsification of records from patients that The truth was not stated in there. So all those things that I witnessed and I call out led me for them, instead of doing something about it. You know, I honestly, if you ask me, I thought I was getting another Employee of the Year award for 2017 because I called out the wrongdoings of the abortionists. But I learned that it wasn't about that. It wasn't about protecting women. It was about protecting the abortionists, so they fired me.
So you had the Employee of the Year in 2016, and then 2017, you're gone?
Yeah, in 2017, literally not even a year after getting that award, I'm gone and fired overnight.
Because you wanted to report the truth?
Yes. Yes, I remember there was a case. He forgot the head of a 14-week baby inside a 19-year-old, and the assistant came to my office.
Did you say he forgot the head? So he left the head of the baby inside of a minor?
Yes. He left the head of, it was a 19-year-old pregnant, 14 weeks, and he left the head inside after inserting already an IUD, which is a copper device that they use to prevent pregnancies. And the assistant came to my office and she said, Mayra, he's ready to go home. And I have told him I can't find the head, and he doesn't care. I look everywhere, and I know he's going to fire me, but I just can't let her go like that. You know, at that moment, and I always think about that. This person that came to my office was a medical assistant. That was her whole credential. And she knew how severe it was for the 19-year-old to go home with the baby head inside. So he was a doctor. He is a doctor. He's still practicing. And he must have known how serious this was when they're telling him we can't find a head. And he's ready to go home. And we argue about it, and he didn't like it. And after doing another ultrasound, we found the head right above the IUD. I left that day and I called my supervisor and I said, that's it. I have enough proof. I'm going to the health department. I'm going to whoever I need to speak to. But he will stop touching women. This will stop happening. And literally 2-3 days later, they fire me.
Wow. So the interesting thing, you said you were working at and director of non-abortion Planned Parenthood clinics where you would actually report problems, adverse reactions. But then when you became the director of an actual Planned Parenthood abortion facility, when you had injuries or incidents like this, you didn't report them, or they did not want to report those. So they had a different kind of reporting system, one for non-abortion, which they would report problems, and abortion, they would hide the problems.
Yes. Yes, of course. Because, you know, they're the ones who dictate our statistics. I always tell people I own a trucking company with my husband. Can you imagine that they allow truck drivers to report their own complications in their trucks? Like, we wouldn't need any USDOT department or Department of Transportation if the truck drivers regulate themselves. This is what we have done with the abortion industry, allow the abortion industry to regulate themselves.
Wow. So now that they terminated you, you went to the health department to reveal the information, that gross information that you just described, where this doctor was ready to leave a head of a baby inside of a 19-year-old girl. What happened after that? You terminated, you're getting information out to some of the agencies, the authorities that need to act. How did this continue? And then how did it ultimately result in a lawsuit against Planned Parenthood?
Well, at that moment, you know, I was like, what am I going to do against this giant multi-billion-dollar multinational corporation? And thanks to the pro-life people on the sidewalk, you know, I got my lawyer. And when I told my lawyer my story about what happened, he decided to take on my case. And we sued Planned Parenthood for wrongful termination under the Whistleblower Protection Act. And we actually won in 2019. You know, now you're going to be shocked to know that even though we submitted reports to the health department and the FDA and all those offices regulating the abortion industry, nothing happened, not to the abortionists and not to Planned Parenthood. So the only thing we were able to do was the lawsuit, which we actually won in 2019. And what we did was make sure to take them all the way to trial. At any point, you know, we never allowed this to go on a settle, because that was not what this was about. It wasn't about a settlement. It was about the truth coming out, and we wanted it in a trial.
So you actually went through a full-blown trial on this case?
Yes, we did. The case lasted about almost 20 months, and then the trial itself lasted about 2 weeks in 2019.
You know, Mayra, I wish it did surprise me that some of the agencies in charge that should have taken action didn't take action. But unfortunately, I think that is, unfortunately, the reality of what we're seeing with some of our government agencies and Planned Parenthood's influence on some of these government agencies and the misinformation that's out there about abortion. So in your situation, I want to go back to the time that you actually changed. You had, obviously you were working around this, and the first abortion that you saw, it didn't change your mind. It may have been shocking to you, but how did God work on your heart? 17 years is a long time to work for a company, and then you end up becoming a whistleblower. How is it that God worked in your heart and changed you to where you are today?
You know, what happened to me, it's kind of like different from other abortion workers that have left the industry and became pro-life. Because for many years, I promoted something I was not in direct contact with, that I was not closely watching it, right? But then once I'm daily, the one puzzling those babies back together with the staff, or at the end of the week, giving that bread back with the 400 bodies to be cremated with medical waste trash, it starts paying a toll on your soul. That's how I see it. You know, I start having a hard time sleeping. I became a very angry person. You can ask my children that. They will attest for that. I became a very angry person, I wouldn't sleep because of the phone calls I will get in the middle of the night from the young girls, you know, about the abortion pill. You told me I was going to bleed like a period, but I think I'm dying. I'm bleeding so much that I don't think this is normal. Or you told me to flush down that big clot when I felt it, but it's not a big clot. It looks like a baby. I can see their face. I even think it's moving. Can you imagine hearing those phone calls in the middle of the night and then going back to sleep? No, I couldn't go back to sleep. So I knew that I had been very stubborn and God was working on me. And I strongly believe that he had me. I had to see this, you know, like, do I wish I had been pro-life without doubt? Of course I did, you know, but God works in mysterious ways. There must be a reason why. And I knew the reason this was my calling, right? I had to see what I have seen in order to be a voice and now be able to tell the world what I have seen inside Planned Parenthood and what abortion is really doing to women. But, you know, seeing the unborn, you love your babies. I had children when I worked for them. I love my own babies, but I failed to see the dignity of every human life. And that's what I think God opened my eyes to, that dignity of that baby, that those babies being puzzled back together and how their dignity had been stripping away from them in such a brutal, horrific way of dying.
Mayra, your story is powerful, but I think it also illustrates in a different way, in a different kind of context, sometimes what Christians and non-Christians do through life. You know, there are unpleasant things that happen around us, and we either inadvertently or intentionally ignore them because we don't want to be bothered by the horror of that particular situation. Abortion is one of those things. Mayra, in the closing minute or so of our program, what would be your final words to our viewers?
There's no freedom on abortion, right? Like what abortion never gives to the women or those babies, it's freedom. And also, I just want to say that I do have my book. Right now, it's currently in Spanish because of the surge of abortion in the Latino community, but we're working on the English version of it. It is called Mayra Rodriguez versus Planned Parenthood. And what I'm hoping is that people will understand what happens to a Christian woman that was born and raised in Christianity, but fell for the abortion industry and how that could change. And not only her conversion, but the conversion of my entire household.
Well, praise the Lord for that as well. And thank you for being a voice of truth and for helping us understand this issue in a greater way. And they can get that book and other information at your website, MayraRodriguez.org. That's MayraRodriguez.org. Mayra, thank you for joining us on Freedom Alive.
Thank you. Thank you. God bless you.
Matt, in my own life, every day, I pray wisdom, strength, and courage, especially in this like age of deception that we live in. So Mayra's story really resonates, with me. And I was really taken by her comment about the mercy of God, right, in that moment. I mean, she was placed in a position where she could literally not ignore and avoid, and she inescapably had to see.
Yeah, in Mayra's situation, she couldn't ignore it because she got elevated to the director position. Earlier, she was able to ignore it and just put it aside. Amazingly work inside these facilities, but ignore it. But when she got elevated to the director position, it was in her face every day. And so she couldn't ignore that. And some of those stories that she mentioned are just horrific, where she was getting these calls in the evening of girls that would call her that had these chemical abortions. And they were upset. They were seeing the baby that was actually moving in the toilet. Oh, unbelievable. How do you go back to sleep with that? But a lot of us can try to ignore things. Like Mayra's phase of life, there was a phase of her life where she was in the midst of this horror, and she intentionally tried to ignore it, pretend like it didn't exist. And a lot of times we as Christians or non-Christians, we go through life and there's this horror of abortion around us. And we try to ignore it because it's not pleasant. We don't want to be involved. We don't want to be inconvenienced. We got our own things that we're doing. And I think Mayra's story really speaks to us that we need to take time to see what is happening around us, see the evil that's taking place, and to speak out against it and to help those people who are caught in that evil. In this particular situation, in the evil of abortion.
No question. No question. And again, it's what we do with every episode of Freedom Alive, really just having the courage to share things that are oftentimes hard to talk about, but they're completely true. And I would just also encourage everyone watching this program at home. God is in the transformation business. He is in the mercy business, and he wants to wrap his arms around you. If you're facing this issue or whatever giant you're facing in your life, the mercy of God is a great, 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 great thing to ask for every day. In closing, remember Psalm 139, verses 13 to 16, which says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." Our freedom is a gift from our Creator. We must never forget that and always protect it. Join us next time where you'll hear victories as well as ways you can stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.